Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is your program to discuss religious liberty events and principles in the United States and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest on this program is Elijah Mvundura, Liberty author, and I'm discovering a very perceptive philosopher of sorts. I've never met anybody other than my predecessor, Clifford Goldstein, who's as comfortable discussing philosophy, particularly in relation to religion and biblical truths. But let's talk about truth. You know, or as Pilate said, what is truth, right? Yes. Or as the president said, it's fake news.
Yes, it's fake news.
You know, we're in a context now where, you know, we point to President Trump, but he's not the first one to say it, but it's now hit the mainstream. The idea that a lot of the information we get is false, not to be relied on.
You know what? Actually, it's very interesting. It's nice that you're mentioning President Trump, because to many liberals, the people in the liberal side, Trump is the
personification?
Yes, of fake news.
Yes,
they believe that he's
irony.
the liar and all that. But actually, the people who started all this is postmodernism. The whole thing, I've been referring to Nietzsche and the like. And the whole thing about Nietzsche is that you can create your own truth. Critical theory that dominated American universities since the Second World War is the one that said we can create our own reality. And so they are blaming Trump for this thing. I would put that on the door of radical liberalism.
Yeah.
They literally destroyed the Christian foundation, the Christian aspect of American culture, and put literally, that's what critical theory is all about. It's about suspicion. Actually, there is one French philosopher who calls Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche the masters of suspicion. They're suspicious of everything. And so they have been literally pulling down all absolutes. There are no moral absolutes. Yeah. There is no transcendent truth. And they talk about Trump. I'm not defending Trump. I'm from Zimbabwe and I'm from Canada. But we need to know that this thing has got a philosophical lineage.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They created the context in which we are there today.
Yeah.
Trump would never have been there if some of these foundations of American culture had not been undermined by radical individualism. And I think this is where I'm coming, that we need to understand this. Before feminism, I'm not against equal rights for women. God created us all equal. But the whole agenda of gender, where gender can be deconstructed, and it's not enough to gender equality. Humanity itself has got to be deconstructed. Our gender, the markers of gender identity.
We've been in a long process, and as you're correctly identifying, I think, the philosophical shifts that took place. In my view, short term, what we're seeing is the immediate payoff of the computerization of ideas.
Yes.
And you know, at least 20, 30 years ago, journalism, which was always subject to bias. I mean, if you doubt that, go and read the story of the American Aurora, a newspaper in early American history. It was banned and accused of being seditious and all the rest, because newspapers back then would, as some of them do now, would sort of buy into a party and twist everything to their own agenda. But journalism used to be subject to certain checks and balances. You would send out investigative reporters, the editors, as the Washington Post even did as recently as the Nixon affair, Watergate papers. You know, they would then double check. They wouldn't just take something because the reporter brought it in. But with the computer and the online opinions and online news, and the cutting budgets for mainline newspapers. I know, I go to meetings where there's a government handout at the door, and I see the reporters taking it, and that's what I read in the news the next day. They haven't checked anything. So this whole instant news and the superficial way news is being gathered and disseminated has played into exactly what you're saying, a process of cutting loose from truth.
Yes.
And the checks and balances have gone, and relatively suddenly.
Yes, but
And you can't rely on
the
anything.
climate of opinion that has created, even social media.
It's bigger than the mechanics of the situation.
Yes, we're
of course.
operating in a certain climate of opinion where we believe that the human being is the creator of his own truth. And if we are, incidentally, there is a way even philosophy has gone off track, because when you go back to Plato, today we just read Plato's philosophy, but Plato wrote his philosophy in opposition to the sophists. The sophists, they said, man is the measure of all things. And when Plato speaks of that ideal world, Plato was saying, no. There is a standard of God. Man is not the measure of all things. Of course, his God is an abstract concept, but still the principle is the same. Man is not the measure of all things. So what has happened with postmodernism is not new. We're almost back at the foundations. We must know that Western civilization is built on two foundations, the Judeo-Christian and the Greco-Roman. And both indeed they were pagans, but they believed that human beings do not create their own reality. There is the gods that are above human beings.
Well,
and
until
so,
the emperors started calling themselves God.
Yes, but still he was somebody he got his authority from the gods.
Yeah.
So what we're having in the modern era that is so radical and very, very different is that man is the measure of all things. And if everyone is creating their own values, then allow Trump to create his own values. The philosophers, they have said it. But they wanted that privilege to themselves. So what we have here, what they have a problem with Trump, is that Trump has democratized the production of fake news, because they were already doing it. And because now it has been democratized, we're now in a chaos.
It.
Yes.
Legitimized.
It is now, everybody's creating their own facts, and that's why we have this moral chaos. And so for me, we need to recover the basis of our civilization. And what is that? There is a reality that we do not make. I think it's so basic.
But how do we recover it?
That's why I believe that we need a religious reformation. And I think that this is the uniqueness of the Christian revelation. It has changed the way people perceive reality. And that's why we have been going back and forth to English Reformation. The English Civil War was the first revolution in the world. The same thing with Newton. They were operating within a theistic context. And that divine ground has been taken off. And that's what Descartes did. Descartes moved it from God to the self. He says, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And this is basically what we're seeing today. It is worked out this way. What Trump thinks is the truth, but that's the trend in modern philosophy.
Yeah. But short term, and apart from spiritual renewal, which I think is central, within our church, I've been saying that religious liberty argues, as it did at the beginnings of our church, that we need a broad-based revival. No question on that. But when we're talking about fake news, for a moral person of integrity and perception and even education, how do you know what's true or not? Because it's all put out as equal. Other than comparing it to your own facts and figures and knowledge, which you would do anyway, and bounce it off that, there's very little distinction between something totally fabricated. During the election, there were entire narratives, complete with video, of different candidates' activities and so on, that we found out later. And they were fictional movie productions.
I think that, I don't know whether people buy to this. I know that but truth in the Christian context, with the Greeks, truth is a proposition. Yeah. Does it align, the principle of non-contradiction? But in the Bible, truth is not abstract. Truth is a person. That's why you cited Pilate before. Yeah. What is truth? What is truth? And Christ said, I am the truth, the way and the life. The reason why we have got fake news is because we have got fake people.
But he didn't mean truth in the factual sense. It was from Latin, was it veritatis or verity? But that's more integrity. What has integrity? What is validity?
Yes, it was.
I think in English translation it's sort of like what is right or wrong or whatever. It's not as deep as what is or in Italian verismo. What is? I think that's the word they use. Absolute bedrock reality. What is it?
Yes. Then maybe it brings up the thing that I was trying to raise up.
It's very philosophical.
Yes. Truth is in a person. We need to, it's very important to underline this point. Jesus said, I am the truth, the way and the life. Ultimately, the truth is in a person. What makes genuine news, or if we want genuine news and the truth, and not fake news, we must first have genuine people. Fake people will produce fake news. And I think that's where the importance of a Christian revival comes. Christ reforms us.
But he gives us integrity. And what is integrity?
Yes.
Joined with Christ, you have
integrity,
character.
yes. And I think that's why, again, why it's very, very important that we do not seek political solutions to the problems that are confronting us. In the book of Ezekiel and in Jeremiah, it speaks about whitewashing. It says you're putting up, you're whitewashing. Jeremiah actually is very strong on that. They've healed the wound of my people lightly, as if it was not serious. It's like giving a Tylenol to somebody who's got cancer. I think the problems in our society are very, very deep. If we want to be able to get the truth in our public discourse, it's important that we build truthful people. And we can never build a truthful people without a grounding in God. There must be a transcendent source of truth. And when I speak of the importance of a transcendent source of truth or of a divine source of truth, on that point, Greek philosophy, in the classical sense, is in total agreement with the Bible. Because Plato's insistence was that man is not the measure of all things. There is a transcendent source of truth, the good. And that all the things that we see down here, it's a mirror of that transcendent ground. And so we have got to condemn the radical individualism, the kind of radical identity that we have in the world today. We can never have truth unless we ground it in a certain source.
As far as I believe, exactly as you say, in the immediate sense, how could the Christian or any person of integrity relate to the multiplicity of misleading, quote, news items?
Yes, we did mention at the beginning of the Reformation that there were many, many Christian sects. This debate is not new. In the early modern period, there was all competing truth. And I can only go back to the revival. The more there is a genuine revival of real godliness, when people can see the truth walking, when they can see truth embodied in real people, that's the only thing that can reform our society. Because it's not just fake news. One of the main themes today is the
fake society.
Fake society, yes. The fraying of the social fabric, where people are alienated from one another. And if we're going to build a community where we can live one another, there is only one thing that can do it. It's the power of the gospel. And the gospel already did announce that. It breaks barriers between people. And to me, I've always found, before I came for this recording, I went to my old church. Most of the members in that church were predominantly white. But the way they treated me was like a brother. Why? It is the power of the gospel.
Yeah.
It is the one that makes friends out of strangers. Indeed, even friends out of enemies. And I think we need to recover.
If God could reconcile man to himself, that's a huge gap. Pretty easy, relatively speaking, to reconcile other humans to each other. Yes.
And I see that reconciliation in the three angels' message, because the three angels' message calls all people to worship the Creator God. And I think, and it speaks of the internal gospel anyway. It speaks of the internal gospel. And as we preach that internal gospel, I believe it is the only thing that is going to bring people together. We can either do it by ourselves. If we try to unite, and that's what multiculturalism and this gent identity are trying to do.
It's a false way
But if you try to bring unity by human means, what you have is a Babylon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a break now. Stay with us and we'll be back to finish our discussion of fake news with real news. We're not spreading fake news here. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, with guest Elijah Mvundura, we were talking about fake news and the underlying lack of spirituality that has enabled it, but of course it has its antecedents in philosophical declension in Western thought, I think.
Yes.
But I try to bring it back to the here and now, and perhaps you and I don't have immediate answers, but the average person is faced with a real conundrum. Fake news is not just from a year ago. But now that they're well aware that there's so much fake news floating around, how does a person look through the forest of dead trees to see some greenery?
That's a tough one. I've been reflecting a lot on it. And I don't think I have a magic bullet, because there is so much. If you cannot trust venerable institutions like the New York Times and Washington Post, then what do you trust? But what I see, however, if you ever see, it seems to me that the real conflict is not so much on the news themselves as in terms of the meaning. What does this mean? I think that because the people resort to fake news when the news reveal the meanings that they do not want. I think maybe this is exactly where it is. There is a basic, I think, agreement on what has happened, but it is about the meaning. What does this thing mean? And it is because we cannot be able to process that, put that within a meaningful framework. That's why people ultimately reject what they cannot put within.
You're getting close to what I was fishing for. We need a framework. So how do you establish the framework to at least sift through this debris field?
Yes. And now, when we speak about a framework, we're also speaking about the worldview. You need something to filter the things that you're seeing.
Because remember, the Bible says the day will come when it will deceive the very elect, if possible.
Yes.
So it's a deceptive time generally on every level, and we're talking about actual news now, but the ideas floating around are quite deceptive.
Yes. Maybe I think we can then go back again to the whole issue of the great controversy. Adventists, they call it the great controversy, or maybe the great war between good and evil. The importance of the books of Daniel and Revelation is actually to give us a framework of world events, so that you can actually see that behind all these world events, there are forces that are mobilizing. The devil has got his strategies. So maybe if I can use the metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle. There is a puzzle that is taking place, a picture that is taking place. And whether it's fake news, whether it's social media, whether it's the things in the economic field, it's all pieces of a puzzle. And unless we have got that great controversy motif, that cosmic war motif, we won't be able to see where all these things mean. I believe that you'll be able to accept hard things if you know what it means. The more you understand what is taking place, right? Even if you see a lion coming, it's really a scary thing, but at least you know that this is a lion coming. You can, okay, maybe let me rush for a tree. But if you don't know what is coming, it becomes really, really scary. And the reason why the primitive people in ancient civilization were afraid of everything is because they didn't know. They didn't know even how to understand nature and the like. So everything became a monster. And that's why when you read mythology, mythology is filled with monsters. And I think there's a Spanish painter who said the sleep of reason produces monsters. And what has happened in the Western world is where our rational faculties have literally been put to sleep. And no wonder why we now have monsters everywhere.
I agree with you, and yet at the same time, there are monsters to be afraid of. And I was talking to a group a few days ago and told them about artificial reality that's coming at us on all fronts, not just...
When you say artificial reality, what do you mean?
Well, not just the goggles that the kids like where they immerse themselves, technology of projection of apparently solid living figures. Like at a concert a few years ago even, Michael Jackson was performing on stage. He's dead. He was performing on stage with live performers, and from the audience, they could hardly tell the difference.
Oh, yes.
That's old technology.
Yes.
This new technology where there can be projection of realities into the clouds and so on. I think things that are apparently almost mystical and magic are derived from real technological reality, and people can be very quickly deceived.
Yeah, but what is happening actually when you look at all those things that we're talking about, they're actually not just creating these things from thin air. They're going back to mythology.
Yes, yeah.
And mythology doesn't make that distinction. That's why, again, The conflict actually in our civilization is between paganism and Christianity.
It's divulging that
Yes,
word.
we need to know that there is always that conflict between paganism.
Devolving, not divulging, devolving.
Yes, between religion, between paganism and religion. I wanted to say that most of the polarities that we're seeing in the world, I've always thought that they are false polarities. When people reduce, for people, for example, in the African experience, there are anchors of realities between the polarity between black and white. And in politics, it's Democrats and Republicans. And if you go maybe to Europe, it's maybe the Polish and the immigrants, or it's between the Christians and the Muslims. And for me, all these are false polarities. The underlying polarity is between good and evil. It's the war between good and evil. And I think it's a Russian author who said that evil does not run between nations. It does not run between nations. It runs through the human heart. That's where the conflict is, the conflict between good and evil. And the more that we are aware that that conflict is within us, and that the point really in our life is not so much to mobilize the forces of good, but to make sure that you yourself, you are standing on the right side. And you can only stand on the right side as you recognize God as your what? As your maker. I think it's Abraham Lincoln who says it, that both sides of the Civil War, they are citing God.
Believe they were right, prayed to the same God.
They believe that they belong to the
spoke of the good angel of our nature, and of course, conversely, the evil.
And the nature, yes. But the issue then ultimately was not so much on whose side God is on, but who is on God's side. And that's why, on that point, why I'm very critical of the many Christians who want to involve themselves in politics, because they actually, as if they're domesticating God, they're making that God is on our side.
Well,
and God is not an
they've chosen man rather than God. Man's
yes, God
but
is
there's something
God.
else, and you probably haven't thought about it.
Yes.
You and I are agreed that there's a thread of evil that's running through man just more strongly than any previous ages. Rulers as recently as Adolf Hitler, in spite of the fact that he mobilized a nation to his evil purpose, he came to believe they'd failed him and that they were the problem. He was ready to sacrifice his whole country as punishment because they hadn't been worthy of him, right? You don't want rulers or parties or factions seeing other human beings en masse as evil. They have evil within them.
Yes.
And I'm going to link to something you might not have thought of. There's a huge phenomenon growing in popular culture now, the zombie mentality, that a large part of the population are going to be, if not already, a zombie nation, that they're dehumanized, they're not humans, they're dangerous, and they need to be exterminated because they're inherently evil. I really think something's being prepared for whole swatches of the population. So how do we separate an acknowledgement that we all have an evil tendency, but we can't turn that against our fellow man, right?
Yes, I think that that's very, very crucial, because what Hitler did, he actually said it, that the Jews belong to another God.
Oh, that. But he also said of his own people, you failed me, you're going to have to die now because you're not worthy of my vision.
Yes, but then, of course, that shows the demonic origins of Nazi philosophy, because, and people forget that Hitler had many references to God. He always spoke about providence.
He even said that Nazism was founded on Christianity.
Yes,
falsely.
He believed in the Almighty. Again, that's why I think the great controversy is very, very important, because if you don't know the distinction between the God of this world and the God up there in heaven, you are likely to confuse God with the devil, the divine and the demonic. And so when you speak about the separation of state and church, we're also speaking about the distinction between good and evil.
Yes.
The distinction between the divine and the demonic. This is very, very, very crucial, because
it's a very interesting insight, and I appreciate
when people talk about church and state, they only think of church and state. We also have church and state. We're also speaking about the distinction between religion and politics, between the divine and the demonic. Once we lose the consciousness of that distinction, there's going to be confusion. And the devil's strategy is to confuse us, that we do not make these distinctions, that we may worship him as God. And in fact, that is the very central thing about the Revelation, the book of Revelation. It speaks of how the devil is going to masquerade as God, and people are going to worship him as God. So that's why we need to read the book of Daniel and Revelation, that we may know where we stand and how to react to the many, many false things that are coming up around us.
We live in an era where it's very hard to understand real truth. And of course, Pilate said rhetorically, "What is truth?" I think if people are grounded on God and His Word and have a deep and abiding faith in heavenly things, they will be able to perceive the essential truth in any situation. But when we're dealing with hard and simple facts about the reality around us, it is possible, as the Bible warns, that the very elect will be deceived. Each of us need to dedicate ourselves to being truthful, and ultimately that writ large will create a truthful society. But in the interim, the illusions and deceptions of evil writ large are going to magnify fake news into the worst possible deception, even for the very elect. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.